The knock came so faint against the howling wind that Garrett Nichols almost missed it entirely. But something made him lift his head from the ledger he had been studying by lamplight. And when the second knock sounded louder and more desperate, he pushed back from his desk and crossed the wooden floor of his ranch house with long strides. The blizzard had been raging for 2 days straight across the New Mexico territory, an unusual storm for Columbus in February of 1886, and Garrett had sent his ranch hands to the bunkhouse with strict orders to stay put until the weather cleared. He was not expecting visitors, and the fact that someone was out in this weather set his protective instincts on high alert. When he pulled open the heavy door, snow whipped into the house along with the sight of a young woman barely standing upright, her thin shawl crusted with ice and her lips tinged blue with cold. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "I need work, any work. I can cook, clean, mend, anything you need." Garrett did not hesitate. He reached out and pulled her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. "You are half frozen. We will talk about work after you are warm and have food in your belly." The woman tried to protest, but her knees buckled and Garrett caught her easily, surprised at how light she felt in his arms. He carried her to the settee near the fireplace and quickly added more logs to the fire, building up the flames until heat radiated into the room. She was shivering so violently that he worried about how long she had been out in the storm. "Stay here," he commanded, though she looked in no condition to go anywhere. He returned moments later with thick blankets and a tin cup of hot coffee. "Drink this slowly." She wrapped her trembling hands around the cup, and as the color gradually returned to her face, Garrett got his first good look at her. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark hair plastered to her head from the melted snow and striking green eyes that watched him with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something unmistakably lovely about her features, a delicate bone structure that spoke of better days. "My name is Theresa Gilbert," she said once she could speak without her teeth rattling. "I have been traveling from ranch to ranch looking for work. I am a hard worker, I promise you. I do not eat much and I can earn my keep." "Where did you come from?" Garrett asked, settling into the chair across from her. "The nearest town is 5 miles east, and I cannot imagine anyone sending you out in this storm." Theresa looked down at the cup in her hands. "I have been staying in a boarding house in Columbus, but my money ran out 3 days ago. The landlady told me to leave yesterday morning. I thought the snow would stop, but it only got worse. You have been out in this storm since yesterday morning." Garrett felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at the landlady who would turn someone out in such weather. "You could have died." "I know," she said quietly, "but I had nowhere else to go. I heard that ranchers sometimes need help, especially with cooking and housekeeping. I thought if I could just find someone willing to give me a chance, I could prove myself valuable enough to keep." Garrett studied her for a long moment. He was 30 years old and had been running the Double N Ranch by himself since his father died 2 years earlier. His mother had passed when he was young, and he had never married, too focused on building the ranch into something prosperous. He employed 6 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, and while he could manage basic cooking, he would be the first to admit that domestic matters were not his strength. But that was not what made him say what he said next. There was something about the courage it must have taken for her to knock on his door, half frozen and desperate, but still holding on to her dignity, that struck something deep in his chest. She could have begged or wept or tried to manipulate him, but instead she had offered to work, to earn her place. In that moment, looking at her green eyes reflecting the firelight, Garrett Nichols made a decision that surprised even himself. "I do not need a housekeeper," he said, and watched her face fall with crushing disappointment. Before she could speak, he continued, Be my wife instead." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Theresa stared at him as if she had misheard, her lips parting in shock. "I beg your pardon," she finally managed. Garrett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "I am not joking, and I am not trying to take advantage of you. Hear me out. I need a wife more than I need a housekeeper. This ranch is growing, and I need a partner, someone to help manage the household, to stand beside me as we build something lasting. You need a home and security. We could help each other." "But you do not even know me," Theresa protested, though her voice held more confusion than outright rejection. "And I do not know you. People do not just marry strangers." "People marry for all kinds of reasons," Garrett said. "In my experience, marriages built on practical foundations can grow into something real, something lasting. I am not asking you to love me. I am offering you a partnership, a home, and my name. In return, you would be my wife in truth, helping run this ranch and building a life here." Theresa set down the coffee cup, her hand steadier now. "And if I say no, then you can stay here until the storm passes and you are fully recovered," Garrett said immediately. "I will not turn you out, and I will not hold this conversation against you. I will give you money enough to get you to Santa Fe or wherever you want to go, but I hope you will consider my offer seriously." "Why?" Theresa asked, searching his face. "Why would you want to marry me? You could have any woman you chose, I am sure. Why offer this to a desperate stranger?" Garrett considered his answer carefully. "Because you knocked on my door in a blizzard and asked for work instead of charity. Because you have courage and pride, and those are qualities I admire. Because I have spent 2 years running this ranch alone, and I am tired of being alone. And because when I opened that door and saw you standing there, something in me knew that you were supposed to be here." Theresa was silent for a long time, her gaze moving from his face to the fire and back again. "I would need time to think about such a decision." "Take all the time you need," Garrett said. "The storm will not let up for at least another day, maybe 2. Rest, eat, get warm. We can talk more when you are feeling better." He showed her to the guest bedroom, a small but comfortable space that had belonged to his mother years ago. After bringing her a basin of warm water and some of his shirts to sleep in since she had no other clothes, he left her alone and returned to the main room. Sleep did not come easily that night. Garrett lay in his own bed listening to the storm and wondering if he had lost his mind. Proposing marriage to a woman he had just met was impulsive and irrational, completely unlike his usually careful nature. But there had been something in her eyes, a strength beneath the desperation, that called to him. And God help him, when he had held her in his arms carrying her to the settee, something had shifted in his chest, a feeling of rightness that he could not explain but could not deny either. The next morning, the snow had diminished to light flurries, though the wind still howled. Garrett rose early and made breakfast, and was pleasantly surprised when Theresa appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his oversized shirt but looking considerably better than she had the night before. "Let me do that," she said, moving to take the spatula from his hand. "You did say you wanted someone to help with the household." Garrett stepped back and watched as she took over cooking the eggs and bacon with practiced ease. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Theresa insisted on washing the dishes. When she finished, she turned to him with a determined expression. "I need to understand what you are really offering," she said. "You said a marriage in truth. What exactly does that mean to you?" Garrett respected her directness. "It means I am not looking for a housekeeper I sometimes sleep with, or a business arrangement on paper only. If you agree to marry me, I would expect us to build a real marriage, to share a bed and a life, to work toward having a family someday." But I also understand that trust and affection take time to build. I would not rush you or force you into anything. We would learn each other and grow together." Theresa nodded slowly. "And if it does not work, if we find we cannot stand each other, then we would deal with that if it happens," Garrett said honestly. "But I would do everything in my power to make this work. I do not make promises lightly, Theresa. If you become my wife, I will protect you, provide for you, and treat you with respect and kindness. I will never raise my hand to you or make you regret your choice." "I have nothing to bring to this marriage," Theresa said quietly. "No dowry, no family connections, no possessions except the clothes I was wearing. I would be bringing nothing while you are offering everything." "You would be bringing yourself," Garrett said firmly. "That is enough." Theresa walked to the window and looked out at the white landscape. "I came west 6 months ago from Missouri after my parents died of fever. I thought I could make a new start, find work as a school teacher or a shop assistant. But there are not many opportunities for single women, and the few positions available went to women with connections or references. I have been slowly running out of money and options. When you opened that door last night, I thought I had reached the end of everything." She turned back to face him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are offering me salvation, and I would be a fool not to recognize that, but I need you to understand something. I am not just accepting because I am desperate, although God knows I am. I am accepting because I believe you are a good man, and because I want to build something meaningful with my life. I want a home and a family, and I want to be a true partner to someone. If you truly meant what you said, then my answer is yes, I will marry you." Garrett felt his heart hammer in his chest. "You are certain?" "I am terrified," Theresa admitted with a shaky laugh. "But yes, I am certain." They were married 3 days later in Columbus, once the storm cleared, with the local preacher performing a simple ceremony in his small church. Garrett had taken Theresa into town to buy her a new dress, and she had chosen a practical blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. His ranch hands attended as witnesses, clearly shocked by their boss's sudden marriage but polite enough to keep their questions to themselves. Back at the ranch house, Theresa moved her few belongings into Garrett's bedroom, and they both felt the weight of the promises they had made. That first night as husband and wife, they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching but acutely aware of each other. "I know this is strange," Garrett said quietly. "We can take this as slowly as you need." "I appreciate that," Theresa whispered back. "But I am your wife now, truly. I do not want there to be distance between us." She reached out in the darkness and found his hand, threading her fingers through his. Garrett squeezed gently, and they fell asleep that way, hands clasped, beginning the tentative process of becoming more than strangers. The following weeks brought a routine that gradually felt less awkward and more natural. Theresa threw herself into running the household with impressive efficiency. She reorganized the kitchen, planted an early vegetable garden in a cold frame, and even began mending the ranch hands' clothes, a service they appreciated greatly. She cooked hearty meals that the men devoured, and slowly the ranch house transformed from a functional bachelor dwelling into a warm home. Garrett found himself hurrying through his work each day so he could return to the house and talk with Theresa over dinner. They shared stories about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their opinions on everything from politics to the best way to train horses. He learned that she was sharp-witted and well-read, that she had a talent for numbers that proved invaluable when reviewing the ranch accounts, and that her laugh was one of the most beautiful sounds he had ever heard. For her part, Theresa discovered that her husband was patient and kind, with a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. He treated her with unfailing respect, asking her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listening to her suggestions. He brought her small gifts from town, a book of poetry, a tin of hard candy, a length of ribbon for her hair. And every night, they lay in bed talking until sleep claimed them, sometimes holding hands, sometimes with his arm around her shoulders, gradually learning the contours of each other's bodies and hearts. It was 6 weeks into their marriage when everything shifted. Theresa had been working in the garden when a snake spooked one of the horses in the nearby corral. The horse broke through the fence, charging directly toward her. She froze, unable to move, and suddenly Garrett was there, pulling her out of the way and taking the full impact of the horse's shoulder against his own body. They both went down hard, rolling in the dirt. When they stopped moving, Garrett was on top of her, his arms braced on either side to keep his weight off her body. Their faces were inches apart, both breathing hard, and Theresa saw the fear in his eyes, fear for her safety. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands already moving over her arms and shoulders checking for injuries. "No," she managed. "I am fine, but you took the hit." "I am fine too," he said, but he had not moved away. Neither had she. "Garrett," she whispered, and then she lifted her head and kissed him. It was the first real kiss they had shared, and it felt like coming home and catching fire all at once. Garrett responded immediately, one hand coming up to cup her face as he deepened the kiss, pouring weeks of restrained wanting into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and shaking. "Theresa," Garrett said, his voice rough. "I love you. I know it is soon, and I know I said we would take our time, but I have to tell you. I fell in love with you somewhere between that first night and now, and I cannot keep pretending this is just a practical arrangement anymore." Theresa felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you when you carried me inside from the storm, and I have been falling harder every day since. You make me feel safe and valued and cherished, and I want to be all those things for you too." They made love there in the garden dirt, too overwhelmed by emotion and relief and desire to make it back to the house first. Later, they laughed about it as they brushed soil from each other's clothes, giddy with the joy of finally acknowledging what had been growing between them all along. That night, their physical relationship truly began, no longer tentative or careful but eager and passionate. Garrett was a generous and attentive lover, and Theresa found herself responding to him with an abandon that surprised her. In his arms, she felt beautiful and powerful and completely safe, free to express desires she had never known she possessed. The months that followed were some of the happiest of both their lives. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, with Theresa's suggestions for economizing and better record-keeping proving invaluable. She befriended the wives of neighboring ranchers, building a social network that benefited everyone. And she and Garrett grew ever closer, their love deepening from that initial passionate discovery into something richer and more complex. Late summer brought news that Theresa was pregnant, and Garrett's joy was almost comical in its intensity. He became impossibly protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a book. Theresa tolerated his fussing with amused patience, though she drew the line when he suggested she stop riding entirely. "I am pregnant, not infirm," she told him firmly. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years while still living their lives. I promise to be careful, but I will not become an invalid for the next 7 months." Garrett knew better than to argue with that particular tone in her voice, but he still worried. The nearest doctor was in Columbus, almost an hour's ride away, and the thought of anything going wrong terrified him. He loved her so much it sometimes felt like his heart might burst from the sheer, overwhelming force of it. Their son was born in March of 1887 on a mild spring morning with the doctor present, and everything proceeding normally. They named him Garrett Nichols, and when the doctor placed the squalling infant in Garrett's arms for the first time, he wept openly, overcome by the reality of holding his child. "He is perfect," he said, bringing the baby to where Theresa lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "You are perfect. Thank you for this gift, for everything you have brought to my life." Theresa smiled up at him, her hand reaching up to cup his cheek. "Thank you for opening your door in a snowstorm. Thank you for seeing past a desperate stranger to the woman I could become with someone like you beside me." Fatherhood transformed Garrett even further. He was devoted to Grant, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him as he grew from infant to toddler to little boy. Theresa watched the bond between her husband and son with deep satisfaction, grateful that her child would grow up knowing a father's love so freely given. 2 years after Grant was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace, and 3 years after that, another son named George. The ranch house rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Theresa managed it all with impressive efficiency, though Garrett made sure to hire a woman from town to help with the heavier household work after Grace was born. "I want you to have time to enjoy our children, not just work yourself to exhaustion caring for them," he told her when she protested the expense. The children adored their parents, and why would they not? Garrett and Theresa created a home filled with love, laughter, and security. They taught their children to work hard, to treat others with respect, to value education and kindness. Family dinners were filled with conversation and storytelling, and bedtimes always included both parents tucking the children in with kisses and whispered words of love. But marriage is not without its challenges, and Garrett and Theresa faced their share over the years. There was the drought of 1891 that nearly bankrupted them before late summer rains saved the cattle. There was the bout of scarlet fever that struck Grant when he was 7, leaving them both terrified for weeks until he recovered. There were disagreements about money, about how to discipline the children, about whether to expand the ranch or consolidate what they had. Through it all, they held fast to each other and to the commitment they had made. When they argued fairly and always made up before sleeping. When times were hard, they supported each other and worked together to find solutions. And through every trial, their love grew stronger, tempered by challenge into something unbreakable. One evening in the fall of 1895, nearly 10 years after their marriage, they sat together on the porch after putting the children to bed. The air was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast New Mexico sky. Garrett had his arm around Theresa, and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling utterly content. "You remember that night in the snowstorm?" she asked softly, "when I knocked on your door half frozen and terrified?" "Every detail," Garrett said. "I remember thinking you were the most courageous person I had ever met, asking for work instead of charity even though you could barely stand." "I thought you were insane when you proposed," Theresa admitted with a laugh. "I nearly said no out of sheer shock." "What made you say yes?" Garrett asked, even though they had discussed this before. He never tired of hearing her answer. "Because I looked in your eyes and saw kindness," Theresa said simply. "And because I was desperate, yes, but also because something in my heart told me to trust you." "It was the best decision I ever made." "The best decision I ever made was opening that door," Garrett countered. "Well, that and asking you to marry me instead of just offering you a job. I cannot imagine my life without you, Theresa. You are everything to me." She turned in his arms to kiss him, a slow, sweet kiss that spoke of years of love and intimacy. When they pulled apart, Both were smiling. "We should probably think about expanding the house," Theresa said casually. "The children are getting older and will need more space soon." "We could add another bedroom or two," Garrett agreed. "Maybe enlarge the kitchen as well. You have been complaining about the limited counter space." "Actually," Theresa said, a slight smile playing at her lips, "I was thinking we might need to make room for one more." It took Garrett a moment to understand, and then his eyes went wide. "You are pregnant again." "I am," Theresa confirmed, laughing as he whooped with joy and spun her around. "I only just suspected it myself. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Their fourth child, a daughter they named Gail, was born the following spring. With 4 children, the ranch house was truly bursting at the seams, so they undertook the expansion Theresa had suggested. The project took months, with Garrett doing much of the work himself alongside his ranch hands and hired carpenters from Columbus. The children grew and thrived. Grant showed an early aptitude for working with horses and cattle, and clearly would take over the ranch someday. Grace had her mother's sharp mind for numbers and loved helping with the account books even as a young girl. George was the dreamer of the family, always reading or drawing, with a gentler nature than his older brother. And little Gail was pure sunshine, charming everyone she met with her infectious laughter and affectionate nature. As the years passed, Garrett and Theresa watched with pride as their children grew into capable, kind young adults. Grant married at 22, bringing a sweet young woman named Mary to join the ranch family. Grace surprised everyone by announcing her intention to attend college in Santa Fe to study accounting, one of the first women in the territory to do so. George showed promise as an artist and writer, and though Garrett had initially hoped he would stay on the ranch, he supported his son's dreams of studying art in San Francisco. Gail was still young when her older siblings began leaving home, but she showed signs of inheriting her mother's organizational skills and her father's love of the land. Through all these changes, Garrett and Theresa remained each other's anchor. They were partners in the truest sense, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams, and continuing to nurture the love that had grown from such an improbable beginning. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1906, Garrett arranged a surprise for Theresa. He had kept it secret for months, working with Grant to ensure everything was perfect. When he brought her outside that evening, she gasped in wonder. He had built a gazebo overlooking the place where she had planted that first garden, the same garden where they had first kissed all those years ago. The structure was beautiful, crafted from carved wood and painted white, with climbing roses already beginning to grow up the posts. "I wanted to give you something beautiful," Garrett said, leading her inside the gazebo. "A place where we can sit together and remember everything we have built, everything we have survived, everything we have loved." Theresa had tears streaming down her face as she turned to embrace him. "You have given me everything beautiful in my life. This ranch, our children, every single day we have spent together. I love you so much it still sometimes takes my breath away." "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," Garrett said, kissing her tenderly. "And I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, the same promise I made 20 years ago." They held each other as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Around them, the ranch they had built together stretched out in all directions, a testament to their hard work and partnership. In the house behind them, the sounds of family life continued, Grant and Mary's young children playing while Gail practiced piano. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They buried Garrett's last surviving uncle in 1908, and Theresa's cousin came to visit from Missouri in 1910, rekindling family connections that had been dormant for years. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region thanks to their careful management and willingness to embrace new techniques and technologies. But nothing brought them more joy than watching their family grow. Grant and Mary had 4 children of their own, filling the ranch with another generation of young voices. Grace married a fellow accountant she met at college and settled in Albuquerque, visiting often with her growing family. George found success as an artist, selling his paintings of the Western landscape to buyers across the country, though he always spent summers back home in New Mexico. And Gail eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, staying close to home and remaining deeply involved in the Double N Ranch operations. As they moved into their 40s and then their 50s, Garrett and Theresa found their love evolving yet again, deepening into something that felt almost sacred in its constancy. They had weathered so much together, built so much together, that they moved through life in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's needs and thoughts without words. One winter evening in 1911, 25 years after that fateful snowstorm, another blizzard swept across New Mexico. Garrett and Theresa sat before the fire, much as they had on that first night, though now they were surrounded by the trappings of their full, rich life together. Grandchildren's toys littered the floor. Photographs lined the mantel. The house was warm and solid, expanded multiple times over the years to accommodate their growing family. "You ever think about that night?" Theresa asked, watching the snow swirl past the windows. "When I knocked on your door all the time," Garrett admitted. "I think about how close I came to missing that first knock, how different my life would be if I had not heard you." "Mine too," Theresa said softly. "I was so scared that night. I truly thought I might die in the snow before anyone would help me, and then you opened the door and changed everything." "We changed everything together," Garrett corrected, pulling her closer. "You could have said no. You could have left after the storm. But you took a chance on a crazy cowboy who proposed marriage to a stranger." "The sanest decision I ever made," Theresa said with a smile. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "All of this, our children, our grandchildren, this life we have built, it all started because I was brave enough to knock and you were kind enough to answer." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the wind. Somewhere upstairs, they could hear Gail singing to her infant daughter, the same lullaby Theresa had sung to all her babies. The sounds of family, of home, of love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. "I would do it all again," Garrett said quietly. "Every single moment, every challenge, every joy. I would live it all again just to be here with you right now." "So would I," Theresa whispered. 1,000 times over. The years continued their steady march forward. The territory of New Mexico became a state in 1912, and they celebrated with their neighbors and friends, proud to be part of this new chapter in the region's history. The ranch adapted to the changing times, incorporating automobiles and telephones while still maintaining its essential character. As Garrett and Theresa moved into their 60s, they began gradually turning over more of the ranch operations to Grant and Gail, though neither of them could fully retire from the work they loved so much. They spent more time in the gazebo Garrett had built, watching sunsets and playing with grandchildren, sharing stories about the old days and making plans for the future. Their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven through decades of life together. They still held hands walking through the property. They still kissed each other good morning and good night without fail. They still found moments to be alone together, cherishing the intimacy that had never faded even as their bodies aged. On their 30th anniversary in 1916, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the gazebo. It was a simple ceremony, with the same preacher who had married them now white-haired himself. But the words held even more meaning than they had 3 decades before. I, Garrett Nichols, take you, Theresa Gilbert Nichols, to continue being my wife, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life, Garrett said, his voice strong despite the emotion making it rough. You have made every day of the last 30 years a gift, and I promise to love you with everything I have for all the days we have left. I, Theresa Gilbert Nichols, take you, Garrett Nichols, to continue being my husband, my protector, my partner, and my truest love, Theresa said, tears streaming freely down her face. You saved my life that snowy night, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. I promise to love you forever, in this life and whatever comes after. When they kissed, their family erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and music and dancing lasting into the night. Watching their children and grandchildren laughing and playing together, Garrett and Theresa felt a profound sense of accomplishment and gratitude. We did good, Garrett said, his arm around Theresa's waist as they swayed to the music. We did very good, Theresa agreed. Better than I ever dreamed possible. As they moved into the 1920s, age began to slow them down more noticeably. Garrett's joints ached on cold mornings, and Theresa's eyesight was not what it once had been. But they faced these challenges as they had faced everything else, together and with grace. They spent their days in quieter pursuits now, reading together, tending to Theresa's flower gardens, taking slow walks around the property they had built together. Grant ran the ranch with Gail's help, both of them consulting their parents on major decisions, but handling the day-to-day operations themselves. The grandchildren were a constant source of joy, and as great-grandchildren began arriving in the late 1920s, Garrett and Theresa marveled at the legacy they had created. What had started with 2 strangers and an improbable proposal had grown into this sprawling family tree. Dozens of people whose lives existed because they had taken a chance on each other. On a warm spring evening in 1930, 44 years after their marriage, Garrett and Theresa sat in their gazebo watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant colors. They were both in their 70s now, their hair white, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "Do you have any regrets?" Theresa asked, a question she had never posed before. Garrett considered carefully before answering. "I regret that we will not have forever. I regret that someday one of us will have to say goodbye to the other, but regret anything about our life together? Never. Not a single moment." "Good," Theresa said, satisfied, "because I feel exactly the same way. You have given me a beautiful life, Garrett Nichols, more beautiful than I ever imagined possible when I knocked on your door that night." "You gave me everything," Garrett said simply. "Purpose, partnership, a family, love beyond measure. I was just existing before you. You made me truly live." They sat holding hands as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else together. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows. They celebrated as their grandchildren married and started families of their own. They mourned when friends and contemporaries passed away. They watched the world change around them, the Wild West of their youth transformed into something more modern and settled. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Even as their bodies grew frail and their steps grew slower, the bond between them never weakened. If anything, it grew stronger, polished by time into something precious and rare. On a cold December morning in 1935, Garrett woke to find Theresa still sleeping beside him, her breathing shallow but peaceful. He lay watching her, memorizing the lines of her face, the white hair spread across the pillow, the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When she finally woke, her green eyes still bright despite her age, she smiled at him. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," he replied, kissing her forehead gently. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted, "but happy. Always happy when I wake up next to you." They spent that day quietly, Theresa dozing in her chair by the fire while Garrett sat nearby reading aloud to her from a book of poetry, one of the first gifts he had given her all those years ago. Their children and grandchildren came by to visit, filling the house with warmth and noise and love. That night, Theresa fell asleep in Garrett's arms, and in the early hours of the morning she slipped away peacefully. Garrett held her until the sun rose, tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking even as he whispered words of love and gratitude for the incredible gift their life together had been. Her funeral was attended by what seemed like half the state. She had touched so many lives with her kindness, her wisdom, her generosity. But no one mourned her loss more deeply than Garrett, who felt as though half of himself had been torn away. In the months that followed, he struggled with the weight of grief. But he was surrounded by family, by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that he and Theresa had created together. They kept him company, shared their memories of her, reminded him that while she was gone, everything they had built together lived on. On quiet evenings, Garrett would sit in the gazebo and talk to her as if she was still there. He told her about the ranch, about the children, about how much he missed her laugh and her smile and the feel of her hand in his. "I will join you soon enough," he promised her spirit. "And when I do, we will have forever like we always should have." Garrett lived for 3 more years, determined to see their youngest great-grandchild born and to know that the ranch would continue to thrive under Grant's capable stewardship. He died peacefully in his sleep in the early spring of 1938, and his family buried him next to Theresa in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Their gravestone was simple but perfect, reading, "Garrett and Theresa Nichols. 2 strangers who became partners, then lovers, then legends. Their love built an empire and a family that will endure forever." In the years and decades that followed, their story became part of family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The ranch they built together continued to prosper, now run by their great-grandchildren, but still bearing the mark of Garrett and Theresa's vision and love. The gazebo remained a favorite spot for weddings and proposals, a tangible reminder of the love story that had started it all. Visitors to the Double N Ranch, now one of the most historic properties in New Mexico, often asked to hear the story of its founding. And the family never tired of telling it, of how Theresa Gilbert knocked on Garrett Nichols's door during a snowstorm in 1886, desperate and half-frozen, asking for work. And how Garrett, seeing something special in the courageous stranger before him, had made an improbable offer that changed both their lives forever. "Be my wife instead," he had said, and she had been brave enough to say yes. From that single moment of courage and kindness had grown a love story for the ages, a partnership that had weathered every storm and created a legacy that would endure for generations. They had built their empire not through force or fortune, but through love, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to each other. Their children often reflected on what their parents had taught them through their example. That love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. That commitment and partnership mattered more than passion alone. That building something lasting required patience, communication, and the willingness to face challenges together. That family was the greatest treasure anyone could hope to accumulate. The Double N Ranch stood as a monument to these principles. Every fence post and barn and acre of land, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they chose to build together. And at the heart of it all was that gazebo overlooking the original garden, where Garrett and Theresa had shared their first kiss and countless conversations over the decades, where they had renewed their vows and watched their family grow, where their spirits seemed to linger still on quiet evenings. On clear nights, when the stars blazed overhead in the vast New Mexico sky, family members claimed they could sometimes feel the presence of their ancestors, as if Garrett and Theresa were still there watching over the land and the people they had loved so much. It was a comforting thought, the idea that their love was so strong it transcended even death, remaining as a blessing and inspiration for everyone who came after. The ranch hands who worked the property, some of them descendants of the men who had worked for Garrett in those early years, spoke of the Double N with pride and loyalty. This was more than just a job or a paycheck. It was being part of a legacy, part of a story that reminded everyone that good things could come from taking chances on people, from showing kindness to strangers, from believing that love could conquer any obstacle. Young couples in the family often asked to hear the full story before their own weddings, wanting to draw inspiration from Garrett and Theresa's example as they started their own journeys together. The tale never lost its power, even as the world changed dramatically from the Wild West of the 1880s to the modern era. Because ultimately, it was a universal story about the courage to take a chance, the wisdom to see potential in unexpected places, and the strength to build something beautiful from uncertain beginnings. It was about two people who chose each other when they did not have to, who made their improbable partnership work through dedication and love, who created not just a successful ranch, but a family bound together by the example they set. The Double N Ranch thrived into the 21st century, adapting to new technologies and changing markets while maintaining its essential character. The original ranch house, expanded and renovated over the decades but still recognizable, was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The gazebo became a popular spot for photography, with its weathered wood and climbing roses providing the perfect backdrop for capturing moments of love and joy. And through it all, the story of Garrett and Theresa lived on, passed down through generations, inspiring countless people with its message of hope and possibility. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them, that courage and kindness can change everything, and that true love, once found, has the power to build something that will last forever. Their great-great-grandchildren walked the same land Garrett and Theresa had walked, worked the same earth they had worked, and carried forward the values they had embodied. The snowstorm that had brought Theresa to Garrett's door was long forgotten by history, just another winter storm in a long string of them. But the consequences of that storm, the life it had set in motion, the love it had sparked, that would never be forgotten. In the end, Garrett and Theresa Nichols had achieved what everyone hopes for but few actually attain. They had found their person, their perfect match, their soulmate. They had built a life that mattered, a family that would endure, a love that would inspire others long after they were gone. They had taken an impossible situation and transformed it into something miraculous. And it had all started with a knock on a door during a snowstorm, a desperate plea for work, and a cowboy who looked at a half-frozen stranger and saw not just her need but her potential, her strength, her beauty. A cowboy who made an offer that seemed insane but turned out to be the wisest thing he ever did. "Be my wife instead," he had said, and she, trusting her instincts and his kind eyes, had said yes. That single word, that leap of faith, had created everything that came after. The children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. The successful ranch that employed dozens of people and contributed to the region's prosperity. The love story that became legend, inspiring countless others to take their own leaps of faith. As the sun set over the Double N Ranch on countless evenings, painting the New Mexico sky in the brilliant colors Garrett and Theresa had loved so much, their legacy lived on in every person who called the place home, in every couple who held hands in the gazebo, in every child who heard the story and dreamed of finding a love just as strong and true. They had knocked during a snowstorm and found not just shelter but salvation. They had taken a chance on each other and discovered that sometimes the most improbable things are also the most right. They had loved each other through decades of joy and challenge, never wavering, never giving up, always choosing each other. And in doing so, they had created something immortal. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a story that would be told and retold, reminding everyone who heard it that love can come from the most unexpected places, that courage and kindness matter, that taking a chance on someone can change everything. The Double N Ranch stood as their monument, but their true legacy lived in the hearts of everyone who knew their story. It lived in every act of kindness toward a stranger, every leap of faith in love, every couple who chose to build something together against the odds. Garrett and Theresa Nichols had shown that it was possible that love like theirs could exist, could thrive, could create something beautiful and lasting. And on snowy nights in New Mexico, when blizzards swept across the land just as one had in 1886, people would sometimes think of that long-ago night when everything changed. When a desperate woman knocked on a cowboy's door, and he offered her not charity or work but partnership and love. When two strangers decided to trust each other and build a life together. It was the kind of story people needed to hear, especially in difficult times. A reminder that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places, that love can grow even in the harshest conditions, that taking a chance on someone can lead to miracles. The story of Garrett and Theresa Nichols was many things. A romance, an adventure, a testament to hard work and dedication, a celebration of family and legacy. But above all, it was a love story, pure and simple. The story of two people who found each other against all odds and loved each other with a completeness that most people only dream of. And it would be told and retold for generations to come, inspiring countless others to be brave enough to knock on doors, kind enough to answer them, and courageous enough to say yes when love offers itself in unexpected forms. Because in the end, that is what Garrett and Theresa's story taught. That love, when given the chance, can build empires, create families, and leave a legacy that will endure long after we are gone. Their love had started in a snowstorm and had burned bright for over 40 years, warming everyone it touched. And even now, decades after they had both passed, it still warmed people, still inspired them, still reminded them of what was possible when two people chose to love each other completely and build something together. That was the true magic of their story, the reason it endured. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. Because it showed that love like theirs was not just possible but achievable, if you were brave enough to take the chance, strong enough to do the work, and wise enough to cherish what you built together. Garrett and Theresa Nichols had done all of that and more. They had created a love for the ages, a partnership that had withstood every test, a family that would carry their values forward for generations. And it had all started with a knock on a door during a snowstorm, a plea for work, and a cowboy who saw something special in a desperate stranger and offered her not just shelter but his heart, his home, and his name. "Be my wife instead," he had said. And with those 4 words, he had changed both their lives forever, creating a story that would inspire countless others to believe in the transformative power of love, courage, and taking chances on the people who knock on our doors when we least expect them.